So in this section of the Cosplay Photography mini-series, we're going to go over some basic camera knowledge. I'm not going to dive deep into it because in this lesson, we're going to focus on the main threes, which is aperture, shutter speed, and ISO. So we're first going to talk about aperture. Aperture is usually the letter F and then a set of numbers afterwards. So take this set of numbers, f2.8. f2.8 is actually a very wide and open aperture. It lets in a lot of light. Whereas if you go up higher in the number, say f22, the hole tends to close, so letting in less light. Also, the wider it is, the blurrier the background. Whereas the smaller your aperture is, which is the higher number, it lets in more detail. Here are some examples of using from f1.4, f1.8, f2.8. You see the backgrounds are very blurry. These are examples from 3.5 to 5. As you can see, the background is a lot more in focus. So those are the two differences in knowing your aperture. So next, we're going to talk about shutter speed. Shutter speed is basically how fast the shutter clicks to take the photo. So the smaller the number, the slower the shutter speed. If it's a higher number, say 1/1000, the shutter speed will be that much faster. So a slower shutter speed introduces a lot of blur, while a faster shutter speed will capture the moment like as it is, very standstill. So even though that you're letting in more light by having the shutter speed at a lower number, you'll just have to be very careful of the blurriness that can happen. So if a model moves their hand accidentally, you might catch it as a blur rather than in focus. Next, we're going to talk about ISO. So ISO is like from 100 to say 4000 or even higher, depending on your type of camera. An important thing to keep in mind about ISO is that the higher you go, the more grain is introduced to your image. So staying at 100 is great for outdoors, but say it is low light, you don't have that much light outside, and you push the ISO all the way up to say 8000, you'll see it very, very grainy, which is not what you want. So if I'm doing a cosplay photo shoot indoors, I would usually have my ISO at like 250 to say maybe 400, but not higher than that, because you'll have other light sources such as the flash that will come in handy. So now that you know what aperture, shutter speed, and ISO are and why it's really important, you'll want to start actually using them in lighting situations. So in the next video, I'll talk about natural lighting and artificial lighting and what to really look for. I'll also talk about some of the best times to photograph and a little bit about composition. So be sure to head on over to that video.